I clenched the crumpled $10 bill in my palm, feeling its weight like a stone in my gut. This was all I had left. Rent was overdue, my little boy Jake was hungry, and my job prospect had dried up like a puddle under the summer sun. But as I walked down the dimly lit street that evening, the sight of the young woman huddled against the wall, shivering in the bitter cold, made my decision for me. She had a thin, dirty hoodie wrapped around her frail frame, her knees drawn up to her chest as she stared blankly at the pavement. Something about her hit me in the chest. Maybe it was the way her fingers trembled, or the hollow look in her eyes. The same look I'd seen in the mirror too many times. Without thinking twice, I crouched down beside her and pressed the bill into her hand. "Here," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's not much, but it's something." Her head snapped up, eyes widening. You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice raw and uncertain. I forced a small smile. "I know, but I want to." For a moment, she just stared at the money, then at me. Her lips parted, but whatever words she was about to say never came. Instead, she wrapped her fingers around the bill like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just nodded and stood up, stuffing my hands in my pockets as I turned to leave. I had no idea that this single act of kindness was about to change everything. The next day, I was dragging myself through another grueling job hunt, rejection after rejection piling up like bricks on my shoulders. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. I had no money for food. Just as I was about to head home in defeat, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hey." I turned around, my brows furrowing. It was her, the young woman from last night. But something was different. The ragged hoodie was gone, replaced by a sleek black coat. Her matted hair was clean and brushed, and she looked different, almost unrecognizable. "You," I said, taken aback. "You're." She smiled, small but knowing. "Yeah, me." I blinked, still trying to process. "You, what happened? You okay?" She chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "More than okay. Actually, I was looking for you. You gave me your last $10, didn't you?" I shifted uncomfortably, not wanting to admit it. "It wasn't." "Don't lie," she interrupted, her voice softer now. "I saw in your eyes. You needed that money, probably more than I did. But you still gave it to me." I shrugged, feeling awkward. "It was just $10. To you, maybe. To me, it was proof that kindness still exists." She hesitated before adding, "Let me buy you a meal." My pride flared up, but my stomach betrayed me with another growl. She laughed at the sound, and before I could argue, she grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a nearby diner. Over a steaming plate of food, I finally asked, "So, what's your story?" She smirked. "That's a long one." I gestured to the half-eaten burger in front of me. "I've got time." She took a deep breath, her expression turning serious. "All right, my name is Celeste, and I'm not actually homeless." I nearly choked on my drink. "What?" She chuckled at my reaction. "I was testing something. I run a foundation that helps struggling families. I wanted to see what it was really like out here, to understand how people survive. I wanted to experience true hardship." My head spun. "You're telling me you're rich?" She nodded. "And I've been looking for someone exactly like you." I frowned. "Like me, someone who gives, even when they have nothing. Someone who doesn't expect anything in return. Someone who deserves a break." I shook my head, trying to wrap my brain around it. "Why are you telling me this?" Her eyes softened. "Because I want to help you, Liam." Celeste handed me a business card. It wasn't some cheap, flimsy piece of paper. It was sleek, embossed with gold lettering. "I want you to come work for me," she said. I stared at the card, then back at her. "You serious?" "Dead serious. I run a foundation that helps struggling single parents. You'd be perfect for it." Doubt crept in. "I don't have a degree, or experience, or—" "You have something better," she interrupted. "Heart, compassion, and a deep understanding of what people are going through. That's what matters." My throat tightened. It felt too good to be true. "What's the catch?" She smiled. "No catch. Just a chance." I exhaled slowly. A chance. That was all I'd ever wanted. I took the job. It wasn't easy at first. I was out of my depth, working in an office, handling cases of struggling families who needed help. But for the first time in years, I had a purpose, a steady paycheck, stability for Jake. Celeste wasn't just my boss. She became my friend. She believed in me when no one else did. Months passed, and one evening, after work, she invited me over for dinner. Her house, no, mansion, was beyond anything I'd ever seen. Over a glass of wine, she looked at me seriously. Liam, what do you want most in the world? I swallowed hard. To give my son a life where he never has to struggle like I did. Her eyes gleamed. Then let's make that happen. Celeste didn't just give me a job. She changed my life. She helped me buy a home, sent Jake to a good school, and most of all, she showed me that kindness has a way of coming back tenfold. One day, she pulled me aside. You know what the best part of this is? I raised a brow. What? You didn't need to give me that $10 that night. But you did. You changed my life just as much as I changed yours. And maybe she was right. I never thought I'd find myself sitting in a grand office, surrounded by people who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent had been. Yet here I was. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the files in front of me. These weren't just documents. They were the stories of struggling families, people who were hanging on by a thread, just like I had been. Single parents working 3 jobs to keep their kids fed. Homeless individuals trying to claw their way out of the darkness. And now, I was in a position to help them. I glanced up at Celeste, who stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. She turned to me with a knowing smile. You're adjusting well, she said. I let out a breathy chuckle. Still feels surreal. A year ago, I was standing in line at food bank. Now I gestured to my surroundings. Here. She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the desk. That's the thing about life. It can change in an instant. One act of kindness, one decision, and everything shifts. I exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of my neck. It's overwhelming. Sometimes I wonder if I really deserve this. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. You do. Don't ever doubt that. I nodded, though the feeling of imposter syndrome still lurked in the back of my mind. But deep down, I knew she was right. And then, as if fate wasn't done surprising me, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach twist into knots. It was my ex. I hesitated before answering. Hello, Liam. Her voice was sharp, tinged with irritation. I heard you got some fancy new job. Guess that means you can finally start paying me what you owe. My jaw clenched. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, she snapped. Child support. You've barely been able to give me anything these past few years. And suddenly you're rolling in money? Yeah, it's time you stepped up. Anger bubbled in my chest. She had abandoned Jake and me when things got tough, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. She hadn't cared whether we had food or a roof over our heads. But now that she thought I had money, she was suddenly interested. I've always stepped up, I said, my voice low and controlled. I did everything I could to keep Jake safe. Where were you? A scoff. Oh, don't give me that sob story. I had my reasons. I gritted my teeth. And now you're back because you think I owe you something? Legally, you do, she said smugly. So I'd suggest you start wiring me some money, or things are going to get messy. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. I had fought so hard to build something better for Jake, and now the past was clawing its way back in. Celeste must have seen the look on my face because she set down her glass. What happened? I exhaled shakily. My ex. She wants money. Celeste's eyes darkened. She abandoned you. She doesn't get to waltz back in and make demands. I ran a hand through my hair. I don't know what to do. I don't want Jake to get caught in the middle of this. Celeste was silent for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. Then we make sure he doesn't. There was something in her tone that sent a shiver down my spine. Celeste wasn't just wealthy. She was powerful. And in the coming weeks, I learned exactly what that meant. She had lawyers. Not just any lawyers, but the kind who could tear apart false claims and expose every little legal loophole. You're going to fight back, she told me one evening as we sat at her study, the fire crackling softly in the background. You're not just some struggling single dad anymore. You have resources now. Use them. It felt strange, stepping into this world where money and power dictated everything. But I realized something. I wasn't powerless anymore. The next time my ex called, demanding money, I was ready. I don't owe you a damn thing, I told her calmly. But if you try to take this to court, just know, I have people who will make sure Jake is protected. And if you want to fight, you better be ready for a war you won't win. There was silence on the other end. Then a frustrated scoff. You think you're some big shot now. No, I said, a smirk tugging at my lips. But I'm not the man you left behind anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Months passed, and life continued to shift in ways I never expected. Jake was thriving, no longer the scared little boy who worried about where his next meal would come from. I had a steady career, helping people who had once been in my position. And Celeste, she had become my closest friend, my anchor, the person who had seen something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. One evening, as we sat on our balcony, looking out over the city, she turned to me with a small smile. You know, you never asked me why I really chose you, she said. I looked at her, intrigued. What? She took a slow breath. Because I used to be you. I blinked. What? She nodded. I didn't grow up rich. I know what it's like to be hungry, to feel invisible. Someone helped me once, and I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd do the same for someone else. Her gaze softened. And then I met you. A lump formed in my throat. Celeste, I don't even know how to thank you. She smiled. You already have, by proving that kindness is never wasted. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. Because in the end, it wasn't the money, the job, or the power that changed my life. It was a single moment, a $10 bill, a choice to help a stranger. And that, more than anything, proved that even in the darkest times, kindness always finds its way back. The night air was crisp as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching Jake play with his toys on the carpet. Just a few months ago, we had been surviving day by day, scraping by, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Now, we had security, a home, a future. But what truly mattered wasn't just the material stability. I had found a purpose, something that filled the empty void that had once consumed me. Celeste had changed my life, but she had also given me the tools to change my own. The phone buzzed on the table, and I glanced at the screen. A message from Celeste. Meet me tomorrow morning. I have something important to show you. I frowned. My curiosity piqued. She hadn't mentioned anything specific the last time we talked. But if there was one thing I had learned, it was that Celeste never did anything without a reason. The next morning, I met Celeste at a quiet, upscale cafe. She was already seated in the corner, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. She looked up as I sat down, a hint of something unreadable in her expression. You've done well, Liam, she said, her voice warm but laced with something deeper. I tilted my head. Is this your way of buttering me up for bad news? She smirked. Not quite, but I do need to tell you something. I leaned in, suddenly serious. What is it? She exhaled softly, folding her hands in front of her. I started my foundation for people like you, because I know what it's like to be powerless. But there's something else I haven't told you. I frowned. Okay. She hesitated for a second before finally saying, the man who helped me all those years ago, the one who pulled me out of the streets, was my father. I blinked. Wait, your father? She nodded. He was an incredibly wealthy businessman, but he didn't always have money. He built everything from nothing, and when he saw me struggling, he decided to step in. He told me something I'll never forget. I waited, heart pounding. The real measure of wealth isn't how much you have. It's how much you can give. The words sank deep into my bones. She smiled sadly. I lost him a few years ago, but I swore I'd carry on his legacy. I'd find people like you, the ones who deserved a second chance, and I'd do for them what he did for me. I swallowed hard. Celeste, she raised a hand, stopping me. No need to say anything. Just promise me you'll do the same for someone else when the time comes. I nodded, my throat tight. I promise. Weeks passed, and things only got busier. My role at the foundation grew, and I found myself getting more involved in every aspect of it. One day, Celeste walked in my office, dropping a thick folder on my desk. I raised a brow. What's this? A new project, she said, leaning against the desk. A community housing initiative. For single parents, struggling families, people who just need a break. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I saw the plans. It was ambitious, expensive. I looked up at her. You really think we can pull this off? She smirked. With you on board? Absolutely. Something inside me shifted then. I wasn't just some guy scraping by anymore. I was someone who could actually make a difference. As the weeks rolled into months, the project came to life. We built housing for struggling families, created job placement programs, and ensured that no parent had to choose between feeding their child and paying rent. And one day, as I walked through the newly built community, I saw a man sitting on the curb, his head in his hands. He looked exactly like I had once looked, tired, defeated, lost. I approached him, crouching down beside him. "Hey," I said, "you okay?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Not really." I nodded, understanding. "I've been there." He looked up at me, skepticism in his eyes. Yeah, I said, pulling out a $10 bill from my pocket. "And someone once told me that kindness has a way of coming back." He took the bill hesitantly, eyes flickering with something like hope. And in that moment, I knew I had become the person Celeste had been for me, and that was worth more than anything money could ever buy. Months later, as I stood in my office, overlooking the city, Celeste walked in with an envelope. She handed it to me with a small smile. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it," she said. I did, and my breath caught. Inside was a deed to a house for me and Jake. I looked up, my voice shaking. "Celeste, I can't accept this." "You can," she said firmly. "And you will. You've earned it, Liam. You worked for it. You deserve a home." Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them away. "I don't know how to thank you." She grinned. "You already did, by keeping your promise." Years passed, and life continued to unfold in ways I never expected. Jake grew up in a home filled with love and security, never having to wonder if there would be food on the table. The foundation expanded, helping thousands of people who had once been in my position. And Celeste, she continued to be the force that changed lives, but now she had a partner in the mission. One day, as we stood side by side, watching families move into their new homes, she nudged me. "You ever think about how crazy life is?" she asked. I chuckled. "All the time." She smirked. "You know, if you hadn't given me that $10 that night, none of this would have happened." I smiled, thinking about how a single act of kindness had set off a chain of events that changed not just my life, but the lives of so many others. "Funny how the world works," I said. She nodded. "Yeah, it really is." And as I watched a single dad hold his daughter's hand, leading her into their new home, I realized something. It wasn't about luck. It wasn't about fate. It was about choice. And I had chosen kindness. And in the end, that choice had saved me.